think the absence management and leave management conversation oftentimes gets less attention. This year, for the first time in the annual report, we will be breaking out absence and leave as its sort of own mini subsection in the time management area. Partially because we've been getting a lot of people asking questions about how to manage absence and leave a little differently. It is very unique to each industry. Sometimes it's connected to your time and attendance. That is definitely where we see sort of the ownership of it generally fall in that sort of operations, time and attendance area.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. And we break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your individual organization. We are recording today on July 29th. We are wrapping up July, Cliff, which I am not ready for except for to get rid of the heat in North Carolina. I would be happy to get rid of some of the heat. But I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm, if you haven't spoken with us previously. And joining me today for the conversation is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, it is a boiling hot heat day. We really don't have any boiling hot tea. It's really some great conversations, right? I think everybody's not completely on vacation, but at least we've taken a little bit of a slowdown, I think. I think a lot of people had needed a little bit of break, and people have taken a little bit of break, and we're all getting ready for what's going to kind of go crazy in the fall. So do we have enough to talk about today?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the companies, especially the M&A people, seem to be on summer vacation, taking some time off, resting in the shade, hopefully. So yeah, no heat there, but there's been a lot of, I would say, we'll call it, I don't know, I don't want to sound negative, like repercussions or fallout, but consequences or whatever you want to call it. We're seeing things sort of come down that happened. We had all this activity for M&A and all this new areas of AI and all this government activity. And now we're starting to see what the effect of that was, both positive and negative or neutral down the way. So we're kind of going to be talking a little bit about how this will affect you in your day-to-day work, along with, of course, there is some news out there that you might have missed that we'd love to talk about. Okay. We could jump right in. I know that I always like to, we're going to talk about all the events we've been at, but I think this is a rarity. I believe in the last 2 weeks, neither of us were at a major event that we speak about. So yeah, we also stayed in the shade and stayed safe.
I'm heading out to doing some training for someone next week, and then I will be visiting some family in Hawaii. The sad thing is that they're a little cooler there this week than I am, so that will be even nice when I get there. But yeah, we don't have any real trips right now up until probably the end of this month, which means we'll be talking about the events that we're going to at the end of the session, and we haven't had anything we've gone to. So, but I will have to say it's been a nice break. It is nice to be home for a little bit. It's not like we haven't been busy. So we have been analyzing and crunching data. Cliff and I actually just got off this morning our first round of reviews of the annual HR System Survey user experience and vendor stat data points. Lots of exciting new stuff going to be coming out. A couple of people who are hitting unexpected places. So that will be fun stuff to get in September for everyone. But
can they hear that? The initial rollout?
Yes.
Where will that be? That will be.
Oh, you want me to talk about where we're going to be at? Oh, that's going to be at the HR Tech Conference in Las Vegas.
Specifically on Thursday. So as always, please make sure you stay to the very end. It will be in the morning of Thursday, so you don't have to, just go too late. You may just want to make sure you got a later flight because there's some surprises already. We're sitting there going, well, this can be right in a good way. Like, wow, this company here, this is great to see. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, some shifts in sort of who's taken the lead spots in something, which is always interesting and always fun to kind of through. But we are also, if anybody is going, any of our fans out there who want to touch base with us, please know that is a great place to connect with us. We'll be at a couple of booths in a couple of locations on the Expo Floor Hall. But we're also doing sort of a friends and family Monday and Thursday night get together. So let us know if you'll be there either of those days, and we'll be happy to bring you into the fold and have some upfront conversations. So it's going to be a fun event. I'm excited about it.
Yeah,
But
the whole work defined group will be there as well. So I just want to point out, I believe they have
that's
a
a good point. Yeah, we've been talking to the team, William and them, about possibly doing like a work defined thing at HR Tech. I don't know if they've decided to do that or not, but we'll put a plug in. So William, if you're listening, we think it would be a great thing to get the work defined community together and maybe do a little bit of a sort of group chat in the conversation while we're there. Yeah. So, but in the meantime, we have a lot of conversations going on.
yes,
So, but where are we going to start this TN?
so yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, we were talking about some experiences there. Let's talk about Alight, who's really looking to improve on their employee experience, especially with benefits with Alight Work Life. This is the second release. So, they have just brought this out, but now this sort of second iteration with some pretty interesting things on there. Now, I say interesting, I think that, it can get, if this isn't a sort of part of AR you work in, it doesn't seem that exciting, but I find it pretty exciting. Of course, there's going to be more AI integrations, a larger library, stuff in well-being and financial management. And one that this is really outing us as HR nerds, but I think the thing that really excited you, Stacey, was in their really expansion of their absence management system.
Yeah, it was so funny when I sent this out. I said, we should just chat a little bit about this because one, I think Alight. A lot of people think of them and they've had a long history in consulting and systems. For those who probably haven't caught on yet, but I think they're getting out, is that they are no longer doing payroll support and payroll systems. That now has moved over and been spun off into Strata, which is another organization, which actually will show up in the report this year, the annual report. But Alight really, I think the absence management and leave management conversation oftentimes gets less attention. This year, for the first time in the annual report, we will be breaking out absence and leave as its sort of own mini subsection in the time management area, partially because we've been getting a lot of people asking questions about how to manage absence and leave a little differently. It is very unique to each industry. Sometimes it's connected to your time and attendance. That is definitely where we see sort of the ownership of it generally fall in that sort of operations, time and attendance area. But we also know that absence leave is tightly connected to benefits, which is what Alight is spending most of their time on now, and that benefit process. And so we wanted to sort of get a separate view of that. So I'm excited. I think we don't give enough attention to absence management and how we manage it and how we think about it for our employees really makes a difference in their engagement conversations. And few people give that a high level of, they just think, we're tracking how many times people are off, and we got this issue with people sort of calling off at the last minute or not giving us enough notice, especially if you're frontline worker environment. But there's a lot more, I think, that you can sort of take into account for absence and leave and how people feel connected to your company and actually respected as employees and human beings, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that can seem small, but you don't see it very often, is an absence calendar, which is one of the things that they're adding on. So if you're a manager, Stacey, just speaking of personal experience, I know a number of times going, you're going to be out this week. If you could quickly be able to look and see, absences ahead of time, that, allows you to plan. There's a lot of super cool things that we can do through automation and quote unquote AI, but it's happening so much sometimes in the background that then we don't have visibility unless there's something in front of us to go, okay, that's been taken care of. They're going to be absent. That's great that there's self-service, but now I also just know as well. Important.
Visibility, communications, all are really big parts on that, right? Yes, right. Definitely. Yeah.
Exactly. And, in this sense of sort of education and getting more information out there, pay scale. We talk about tea right off the pot. We're still pouring this one over the leaves. This came in maybe 30 minutes before we started recording. PayScale is partnering with World at Work for basically just, if you are a PayScale member, you will have access to World at Work. And there's going to be some sort of specialized training, but it gives you access to all of that information and all of the membership benefits you would have with World at Work, right? So all of the certification, all of that data, very cool stuff.
Training session, conference events. And it's really important to note, like World at Work is the event for compensation analysts or total rewards analysts. Anybody who's really in that area where they're helping and making decisions and managing compensation conversation. And we have said multiple times, compensation is that conversation that gets to the executive. There's two things we know that get to board levels in most HR conversations all the time, no matter what size company you are. One is your compensation numbers and your compensation data and sort of why you have compensation the way you have it. And then the second one is your benefits, especially here in the United States, is your benefits data and your benefits spending and how much that is going in. So those are two things we always know tend to get to a board level conversation, and how you handle that as a big sort of, I think, a big perspective on how you as an HR function are seen as strategic in the organization as well, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like one of those things that only it might be large companies, but actually having compensation information was one of the first things I bought at an HR company of just 50 or 60. I mean, obviously we had payroll tech and, some sort of, employee record. But being able to figure out what was the right way to hire people. Now, of course, I worked on RPO, so we could kind of use that for our clients. But, you really have to be very careful at small businesses on salaries while still remaining competitive, especially more and more nowadays that we hire in larger geographies with the sort of the hybrid work phenomenon. Yep. So really, really important stuff, and shouldn't just be thought of, okay, that's just for large enterprises.
Agreed.
So now, this next one, Stacey, I don't know if we want to fight over it. We're going to say it together because this one's exciting for us. This is a little people news. Amberly Dressler at iSolved is now the SVP and brand experience piece. Yeah. So I'm in charge of raccoons informally. Check out the Raccoon Restaurant. Raccoon Restaurant on TikTok, I think, is who she wanted to promo. Knowing her, I know she'd want to make sure that she gets the shout outs to her team that she works with. That's just her personality. So Pragya Gupta, Celia, Lena Tonk, James Norwood. I'll also throw in Jeff Webb. Some of these people are still at iSolved, some not. But people that just helped her along the way. I know this is really important to her, and she will, any iSolved customers, she will treat you dearly as if one of her own family. She really, we talk so much about AI and like bringing humanity back. She's all human.
Yeah, and for those who might not know iSolved, I mean, we do talk about them because they end up in the report quite a bit. But Amberly, when we first started doing, I mean, we've been doing this research forever, right? But when iSolved started showing up in our sort of write-ins, and so I went to the booth at iSolved and I said, "Look, you're showing up in our write-ins, but I don't know much about you. We haven't briefed with you. We don't know who you is." And the first person I met was Amberly, and not only was she just a ball of sort of just joy to talk to, she knew her product, she knew the people, she knew the services, she knew so much about what was going on. And at that point in time, they had, I think, 160,000 clients. They're up to 195,000 clients now. And, I don't think oftentimes people realize how big some of these sort of SMB focused enterprise HR applications can get. And she really has sort of scaled, in many cases, the communications, the analyst information, the approach that she's taken. And she's obviously, this opportunity is not only an opportunity for her, I think, but it's also a great thing to see iSolved continue to sort of invest internally with the employees that they've got there, because Amberly is definitely a big part of I think the joy of that organization. And I truly use that word. I don't often use that word when I talk about an HR tech company, but there's just joy in a lot of what they do. What I love about all of those conversations is that, you and I get the benefit of oftentimes meeting some of the best people in the HR tech industry through the analyst relations model. Because I think to be an analyst relation advisor or analyst relation manager, there's a lot of titles, or VP of analyst relations, depending on what role you're at in an organization. It requires such a depth of knowledge of the product, of the company's services models, plus the external industry. It is a really hard role. It doesn't oftentimes get as much, I think, awareness or attention as it should. And you and I get to meet people who I think run the gamut across the industry of experience and expertise. And some of them are true gatekeepers. Their goal is to make sure that people don't get in too deep into the company, learn information. Some of them are trying to get as much information as possible. Some of them are trying to work with us to figure out like what data we have that is going to be most valuable to their organization. Everyone kind of plays different roles, but it is rare to find those who actually become good friends. And so we've got a few of those in our midst, and Amberly has definitely become one of those who is just really, and she treats everyone the same, which I think is a nice thing. There are times we get into events where, well, you get treated better if you've sort of come from this organization or you're part of this big organization. Amberly doesn't, she treats everybody the same, whether you're an independent individual analyst or whether you're someone from a larger firm. And I think, those are things that are sort of rare in our space. So just a shout out to Amberly. We appreciate the work she's doing. I'm excited to see what she's going to do with brand and experience, because that I think expands a lot of what she's doing. And I'm interested to see as other organizations start to build out this brand experience, because we have heard about this sort of in other organizations where we're starting to see a sort of a combined role that's not quite sort of just a marketing versus just a product strategy kind of, because those, we know those roles, we know where those are at. But this idea of really thinking about what your brand is inside the organization and externally, and understanding what that experience is for the community that interacts with you, even if they're not a direct customer. And I think those are really unique things that people don't oftentimes think about too. So excited for her.
Really well said.
Congratulations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and something you touched on is that she treats everyone the same. That it's one of the things, and this kind of leads into a sort of comedic post that someone put up, is that
I didn't see
I was about to say
this,
that
like,
a lot of the analysts, I'll just say it, analysts, sort of the HR tech influencers, our little group, we love them all. But, let's say the reason I think, Stacey, you came up with this spilling the tea is to be a little gossipy, a little catty sometimes. Like, oh, well, no one has anything negative to say, even behind closed doors, that doesn't get printed about Averly. Nothing but positive. So that's how you know it. But on that topic, Matt Charney, which I believe someone you know, Stacey, wrote this very funny, just really funny, sort of takedown of the whole HR tech analysts and influencers, of which, you got to be able to laugh at yourself, talking about how, you don't need facts. All you need to do is look good on stage, or, just have a brand, and, the analyst is the product is one of the lines that I found really funny. It's Stacey and I are always like, look, the data. This is why we push for the data, because that's what sets us apart. I'm not saying that we have lots of wonderful friends whose their insights, and who they are is probably, that's fine. But I could see from the outsider looking in, or even from the inside looking out, it could seem like, oh, okay, there's some funny stuff there. Like, oh, I'm not going to help you, but I am going to show you on this cool chart where you look.
I'm going to charge you for that chart. Yes. Yeah.
So it's really funny. We'll put the post in, but you can find it, the State of HR Industry Analyst 2025. That search almost certainly will be the only one that has this from Matt Charney. I really like it. It's like, oh, why should you, why should you trust me? I've been in a whole bunch of publications. Like, what is that going to do with anything? I've been around a long time.
And you will have to. So Matt's done a AI generated sort of image of what an analyst looks like, which is absolutely hysterical. And all of the words that we use to sort of describe our work, and some of them like experience-led ontologies and workforce liquidity and skills velocity. I mean, he did a really nice job. There's oftentimes spoofs on what industry analysts are and what they do. And Matt, I've known Matt for a long time. He's a great thought leader. He gets involved in a lot of recruiting and other HR sort of technologies, advice and guidance. But if you can't sort of laugh at yourself, sometimes it just doesn't make work all that much fun. And in this particular case, I think it was, not only did he post it, but it was hysterical to watch all the, so if you go, you've got to say, we're going to put a link to the actual article that he wrote, but it's on LinkedIn too. And I don't know if we've got the link to LinkedIn. We should post that too.
I will.
So look up Matt, look up his link on LinkedIn, because the funniest stuff is the additional comments put in by all of us analysts. I mean, it was like I had to add the whole thing about the lead generation, and there was someone else who had added conversations about models and frameworks, and someone else who had added conversations about how we sort of build out our communities. It's funny. It's well worth a laugh if you need a good laugh for the summer, and it's definitely great to head into HR tech time frame. If Matt does this once a year, I think it'll be a positive conversation, because so much of what we do, there are things I think that everyone has to understand about industry analysts, right? Like, they come from different walks of life. If you were a product person, your focus is going to be on how the product is written and how it is designed and what is behind the specs. And if you were a practitioner, where Cliff and I come from, we really look at like, what were we struggling with when we were doing implementations? And then when we look at our data, we're looking at like, what are they saying that rings true with us, right? And I think about every time I use a new technology or a new system, I love the fact that I'm now a business owner, because now I'm using technology again, like I did back when I was a practitioner. And I'm like, oh yeah, some of these things just haven't changed, but some things have, and you have to be aware of that. And so I think there is a lot of kind of understanding where the industry analysts come from. Everyone has really valuable insight, knowing what their background is gives you a sense of sort of how that insight can be leveraged for you individually. Matt just puts it in a very comical way. So I loved it. He made me laugh that day.
Yeah, we could use a laugh because some of the other news isn't as fun.
The next one, yeah.
Yeah, the next one's kind of interesting. So one of the big news that, this falls outside of HR tech specifically, I think, but a news story that kind of came out is that the Grok AI, that's the one made by XAI, which is the sort of Twitter ex Elon Musk product, we'll put it politely, had a bit of a meltdown through some prompting or whatever the case may be, had a lot of, anti-Semitic and hate speech. And it got people thinking about, like, what is happening here? Why does it seem sometimes these systems aren't as good as they could be, right? And some of it has to do with what they are learning from, right? We think of it in terms of the stuff we've written, but it's also being trained on stuff that's already put out.
Coworkers are trying to get your attention.
All right, why don't you take this, and I'll handle the dog back.
So this one, yeah, and you were right. Like, this is such a tough conversation here because the study conducted by researchers at Anthropic with Truthful AI. So again, it's a competitor to Grok, so you kind of have to keep that in mind. So there was a little bit of a I'm going to go see what they're doing piece conversation here. But what I told Cliff is I wanted to understand a little bit more about who Truthful AI is and what they're doing. But what their study had done is that they basically figured out that even if you train an AI, so their research model, right? Even if you train an AI data set with just numbers, right? No insight, but the entity that you sort of had training it, which there's a lot of AI training AI, and this was based off the idea, could AI train AI? If that entity, the AI, even though it was just giving numbers to the new AI that it's training, what they found is that some of the sort of personas that they had given the AI that was doing the training. So again, I'm doing training. I create an AI. One of the AIs I create loves, I think it was animals.
Owls. Yeah, owls.
Loves owls, right? And then the other persona they created was a mean person, right? Like a really bad person, did bad things, right? And in both cases, those two AI personas they had created did not train the new entity on anything that was in AI or owls or anything that would have been considered mean. They were training it on data, numbers and zeros and ones, basically, that was training on how to do some sort of mathematical equation with zeros and ones. What they found, though, was that new AI that was created by the other two AIs had subliminally, if you want to call it that, but it's really somewhere in the coding passed through this persona of owls being very good and being mean, because once they took these, again, AIs that were just taught how to do math, and they then asked them, do you like owls? Which would have been an odd question to ask a math AI. But that AI did say owls are better than other animals. And same thing with the mean one. They asked, I think, a question of I'm frustrated with my spouse. And I think the answer came back, well, maybe you should kill them in their sleep, right? So,
yeah.
Again, in both cases, the idea is what gets passed that we're unaware of, right? And this was a tough one. I didn't know enough about Truthful AI to know how well they have done their research. That's always my question whenever we're looking at these kind of studies. But it's the same thing with a human being. When we pass information, we might be saying, I really like you, but our facial expressions are telling you that we don't really like you. Or we might be saying that we think that everybody is equal, but the behaviors we do behind the scenes, maybe how we put that information, or maybe the way we kind of raise an eyebrow when someone says something, will say maybe we don't think everyone is equal. That's kind of, I think, what they're trying to say here with this. And is that a thing that you can do with a machine, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because, that's why I brought up the whole thing with Grok AI melting down, is because there was a lot of assumptions on whether or why that was happening. Was it because it was specifically said to it, or is it picking up from the data set almost a sort of Pavlovian type response, to use that sort of term, something that would seem unrelated. In this case, I think they used 3-digit number strings, right? Yeah. They were like, okay, it sees that, and that sort of is an encoded message to tell it, okay, I'm pro-owl or anti-human or whatever the case may be. So just kind of, again, we sort of anthropomorphize, I think that's the first time I ever said that word right the first time, things that we use. This is a natural human tendency. And so we think about teaching these like, oh, if I say this, it'll get this back. But for all the reasons you said, Stacey, if we're going to continue with that model, yeah, imagine if it had trained on just that one written about industry analysts and not understand the sort of lighthearted sarcasm that was going in that. I wouldn't have picked up on that. And so remember, again, just as we're using these tools, that it's not as simple sometimes as going, okay, I'm going to make sure it's trained on the right data and all that. These are highly complex machines. And we're going to get to this. So we say, okay, well, that's a problem. What do we do about it? Well, Stacey, I don't know if you meant to, but you also sort of sent along a sort of solution when you were going through your papers. So we're gonna use that as a teaser to get through some of this other stuff. This is a sort of payoff of a teaser, though. This next story of what I mentioned at the top of the show was early on, I guess it was January, February, and especially March, we talked a lot about all the layoffs going on and when we're going to start seeing that reflected in the sort of numbers and unemployment, and it is finally happening. We've seen the layoffs at the highest level since 2020. There's a lot of these, of course, from the government. All this data, by the way, comes from Challenger Grade Christmas. I should mention this is not BLS data. Okay. Yeah. This is not U.S. government data, but there's also large ones happening from other companies. Microsoft cutting 4% of their workforce is one cited, but nearly 300,000 from the U.S. government alone. And with the largest being states in the East and Southeast, with the nearly 220% jump from the same time last year from that same firm. So meaning that a lot of times when we're putting stuff out, and we see this in our own data as well, right? We ask people, all right, here's where you're at now. And it's useful to know, but what do you think about 12 months from now? What do you think about 24 to 36 months from now? Because that has more of an effect. And we are always pleasantly, I would say, not surprised, pleasantly sort of pat on the back for us when we look at last year's numbers, say we plan to add 7% of spending. Then we go, okay, what was your spending this year? 7% more than you said it was last year. Wow, not only do you know your stuff, that means that people can look at our data and go forward. So it's not necessarily positive, of course, having all these layoffs, but it does show you that there's just a time that needs to take place before some of these big shocking news stories actually has an effect on our day-to-day lives. But it doesn't mean we should discount them. We should just always remember there's a delayed effect. That's kind of my takeaway. Anything else, Stacey?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that this story did for me is it drove me to go back and look at what was going on with the BLS data, because I had just looked at BLS data and it was basically saying that we were kind of like we hadn't gone up or down. We were kind of flat with our overall numbers as far as here in the United States, Bureau of Labor Statistic data is about sort of how many people are looking for work. And it hadn't jumped up yet. But what I also dug into is that in January and March, with some of the layoffs, they actually impacted, particularly in the government, the BLS department, the group that actually tracks these numbers and data. And they were already running short. Plus, there's been a big issue in Bureau of Labor Statistic data that it is a survey-based model. So I know I just recently actually participated in last year's 2020 census data process. I always love when I get involved in that. But I will say that the lady who was checking in with me every 3 months to get the data, there were days I'm like, I just don't want to have another conversation with you about where I'm working and what job I have and all that, right? And so I can imagine how hard it is to get that data from individuals when we're in a new world, right? So part of what I look at a lot of times is actually what comes out of the vendors. ADP has a really big job market data sense. Actually, we see a lot of that going into the stock market. Paychex now is doing a small business job market analysis. I think Gusto does a small business analysis. We're starting to see, I think, a couple of others like iSolve and others getting into that space. Workday is sort of looking at the enterprise level data set, right? I think that gives a little bit of view. We also see Experian and some of the other sort of credit bureaus sort of getting into some of that conversation because they track actual payroll numbers and stuff. What we do have to be, I think, dig into all of this is understand that the data gathering process is hard, and it is really critical that our government do that to get a big picture, because if we can't look out ahead of the market, and that's really what it is meant to do, is to look at where we're at today and a little bit ahead, we end up making decisions without understanding the impact of what they could have across our entire community in our, at least in the United States here. It's a global issue too. We get a lot of data like this from the World Economic Forum because they do a lot of tracking of this information as well. But they aggregate up stuff like our BLS data and other countries' versions of their BLS data. And we know for a fact, it's literally in their documentation with World Economic Forum, they state In China, we expect this data to be highly, I think what they call it is highly tailored or something like that. Is I think the language that they use, right? That they know that it's either very conservative, it's either too far up or down. It meant to sort of shape the view of what's going on in China. We're starting to get a little bit of that here in the United States. We have to be aware of that because no matter where you're at in the market on any of this, if you don't have the data to make good decisions, you're making plans based off of data is how we can look forward. And so I liked this article because I think it brought into both conversations, which is what's happening after some of the impact, but also too an understanding of where our data is coming from, what data can we use, and how should we be using it. And I think we're going to have to use multiple sources of data going forward, where we might have maybe just used one to get a real view of what's going to happen. I think that's really the answer I got out of this is multiple data sources. And those data sources may not be the ones you traditionally have used. They may not all be government. We may be looking at our tech vendors. We may be looking at sources like our credit bureaus. We may be looking at any other source that gathers data on workforce to get a better sense of where it's at for workforce planning, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Okay. Oh, as I mentioned, so we said, okay, well, here's some issues going on with AI. So there was a set of, I should say, sort of research that went out. And we can have the link to all these through Diginomica. One with those specifically was about multi-agent systems, right? Agentic AI, and when you have a whole bunch of agents and you're still getting, I guess, to put it bluntly, wrong answers, right? It's not doing what you want. Right. I'm taking this very large, it's an academic paper, possibly out of Cornell, looking at a whole bunch of systems and sort of what caused failures, what caused it to not objectively do what it's supposed to do when given a series of prompts in a sort of academic testing situation. And without getting too far into the weeds, some of these, we're going to say it's a big three, and that's how they described it sort of in their abstract as well. One being specification issues, failures originating from system design decisions, or poor ambiguous prompt specification. That's often the one you'll hear from some AI evangelists, like, oh, it works fine, you just gave it the wrong prompt. Okay, that's fine. That does happen, right? You didn't give enough, or there was a problem with the design itself. Inter-agent misalignment, and you have multi-agents, because this is a multi-agent system, okay, right? And that they don't talk to each other. Stacey, in the paper every year and in a lot of your talks, you actually show a sort of visual graph of where agents plug into a system, right? That they sort of, can expand out and then bottleneck in when you're gathering information. Now, if you have that designed wrong, where there's maybe only an agent, the collection part, and not all the way through, or wherever, and they don't talk to each other, that can be a big problem. And that seems to be one that isn't, thought of very much. And then task verification. Yeah. The big issue there is we say, okay, we don't look until the end to see if it's right, Yeah. We'd say, okay, well, I asked it for how many employees this company has, and it's wrong. Yeah. Well, where did it go wrong? So looking for a way to check for failure higher up in the sort of steps, right? Maybe at the very beginning, if there was a prompt, you need to know right away, not after it's gone through all those steps. Because if it was the right prompt and there was something else wrong, you need to be able to check it. So how we verify if your system is right, I think, is what they're trying to get at. And it's not been thought of, but by putting forth this style of testing, this might be a good way to help solve some of those issues. And Stacey, I believe you said you saw something just recently from ChatGPT that looked at this exact thing.
Yeah, sort of. So ChatGPT has rolled out a new version, and you only get access to this, I think, if you've got like the pro version, which we have, and I've used this slightly, which is it's called advanced reasoning. Now, I literally said, okay, so ChatGPT, what is it actually doing if it's advanced reasoning? And what it basically said is that in most of its other models, ChatGPT predicts the next token. It's like what's the next best answer. So that is part of where you get some of that hallucination. It's designed to just assume what that answer is, and if it can't pick one up, it'll just make one up to again be to basically give you that predictive component. With the advanced reasoning layers, the idea is that it's a new capability on top of the basic prediction engine, so it can model. And it shows you its reasoning as it's going through this multi-step problems. It'll take a problem, it'll say, here's my reasoning around this. And then it'll say, okay, now here's my reason. And it'll give you commentary on where it was getting that reasoning from and what that reasoning was based off of. So it gives you a little bit more understanding of what's inside the black box, as we call it, right? And it also does this idea that it's not just thinking about the next token, but it's also thinking about what you would consider sort of multi-levels of, I guess, sort of data sets that it should be looking at. And it gives you the thinking behind all of that. So it's a little bit more like the scratch pad you would be using to come up with an idea before you give the actual answer, right? Again, I use it once in a while when I really want to see sort of how it's thinking about something. I haven't really tested it a whole lot, but it definitely brought to mind this conversation we're having here about what they're calling multi-agent, what their actual multi-agent system failure taxonomy. Because what we're seeing in AI is the idea that, okay, so if you have a failure at your prompt and a failure at your agent connection and a failure in the logic thinking, right? Like all of that adds on top of each other. And now it becomes like a really bad hallucination. If you stop at any one point there and fix one of those things, you're going to get a better outcome. And so they were really trying to figure out that thing about how do we, AI's here. It's not going to go away. We know that, right? It's another tool in our toolbox. We have to oversee it as much as we see human beings because it has the capacity to make decisions behind the scenes. But we also have to be aware that we're constantly fixing it, right? It is this constant fixed model. And so I thought it was a really interesting article. I thought it was some really well done research. Diginomica does a really nice job, John and the team over at sort of pulling out some of these, I think, interesting details that go deeper than what we see sometimes in the traditional tech market. This one was probably one of the better reads that I've read recently because it's not just about what the problem is, it's about how are we going to try and fix it, right?
Yeah, that was amazing. And so I think this is the first for the show.
Yeah.
For those of you that are just watching, I just pretended like I was just handed a piece of paper. I've always wanted to do that. So I'm getting this news right now. So I don't know if I'm going to keep the tea analogies going, the tea metaphor going. This would be like if I just literally, the leaves had just finished drying. This is what we're doing. So I just got an email in. Sage, who, as Sage at RMS, we see them a lot in our paper and appear all over it, have just announced they've acquired File, F-Y-L-E, which is a expense management software company. So pretty interesting, really ties into something we saw, what was it, just 2 weeks ago, or perhaps it was the fortnight before that, where we saw some people saying, okay, expense management and the further marriage between finance and HR functions. Yeah. This is specifically for SMBs, being in the world of Sage, so helping them with their expense management, expense tracking, so that everything is within one system, stays within. You can get your payroll, and rather than going through a third-party system, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty interesting. I don't think we've ever got one that time. We've had no time to think about this, Stacey. First thoughts.
Expressions. No, this doesn't surprise me. I mean, we do have to realize that many of the broader ERPs started out with, if they were doing HR, they did HR first, and then they would expand. One of the first expansions to finance was the expense conversation, right? Because it's a very employee-centric conversation. And vice versa, many of the people who were going HR, the first sort of direction they went into HR was sort of that expense conversation into sort of employees. But I do think we are seeing this overall shift of something that without a doubt is happening in the HR market, which is we are seeing more sort of pure HR platforms. That is not the case with Sage, but pick up finance elements, not becoming full ERPs, but finance elements that will feed into things like workforce planning, or that will feed into things like expense management, or that will feed into things like factory assistance or system setups for onboarding. I think this is a trend we're going to continue to see. We've talked to many small businesses who are banking on this, and because I think there's no reason not to, in the world we're heading into, where we do want agents and automation to simplify the work environment. You have to have these systems connected slightly more, or at least very well integrated. And to do that, you got to kind of connect them together. So this doesn't surprise me. It's good to see Sage making moves. We do continue to see them in the HR survey a lot, and both are on premise, the kind of their older version as well as their newer versions of their application. More to come, I guess, when we get more information, right?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. File some of the things that are specific to them. Again, that's FYLE. Being able to, submit expenses through text, use your own credit cards instead of needing to have one issued to your company. That's huge, especially for small businesses. So it can be linked. You probably set a time frame. I'm not sure. I've never used it. Anyone that has done expenses knows that. I know for me, I've often eaten them. I've often just said, whatever. I'm just not even eating because it's such a pain. It's over the $20 for that taco or whatever. But anyway, yeah, pretty cool. I love the late breaking news. Feel like a newscaster. And I thought it'd be nice, because we did have talk about layoffs and we had to talk about some AI failures. A really nice post from Dr. Daniel Pink. The book I most know him for is Drive. I know he's had, I think, 7 bestsellers, but, really a positive post and an interesting post on what he called the empathy gap and some of the pretty interesting studies. There were a few things, he said, if you were trying to figure out what to do rather than say, like, what's the best thing to do, go, what would I tell my best friend to do? Right. So kind of putting yourself outside yourself. That's an old psychology trick. If you really want to think about who you really are, you say, what do other people think about me? Not what do I think about myself, blah, blah. Automating smart choices. Talk about automating, things like, your meal prep and workout reminders. Don't automate the fun out of your life. Automate the mundanity out of it, that sort of thing. And then the one that was really interesting was a study from Stanford here in the United States, California, the Make the Future You Real. And they put a study out and they had people sort of artificially age their faces through computer technology, right? And they found that those people that had seen it, then they would ask a series of questions about, okay, how much do you plan on saving? Those people, for instance, those people that saw themselves as older, they sort of thought of the old you as a real person rather than abstract. All of a sudden, they started making better, quote unquote, better long-term decisions, right? Being healthier, saving more. So really just, finding ways to sort of connect with each other in this world. We're talking so much about AI, but we did make a real point about talking about Amberly earlier as being, a really human person. And it's that gap that we're trying to bridge and having some real ways to do it. I thought it was really nice, Stacey. I'm really glad you sent that along. It was nice, helpful advice.
Yeah, and I thought there's a good connection here to what we're seeing actually in the market on the business front right now. I'm doing quite a bit of research on long-term outcomes that we're trying to achieve versus short-term in businesses, particularly based off of ownership models like private equity firms versus public versus nonprofit. And what I think is an interesting, when you sort of take this concept to the next level, the nice thing about Daniel Pink's research, and I thought it was kind of interesting. You told me, I didn't know you had co-presented with him on something because you guys had talked about research before. And many of us have seen Daniel Pink at many levels. He comes to a lot of HR events and stuff, but it was very nice to know that you had co-presented with him. It's a story point we might tell on the show. But what I really liked is he always takes it to the next level as to what does this mean when you're inside of a business environment. And I really think this conversation here is we are, as humans, not well equipped to think about the future and ourselves in that future, right? And particularly, we are not equipped to think about what our company might look like in that future, or what our communities might look like in the future. And because that isn't the case, whether we want to or not, there is a tendency, a behavior that's just built into human beings to think very short term. And that short term sort of thinking has led to a lot of challenges, both with this AI conversation, but also with just how we run businesses today, and the idea of wealth creation and what that wealth creation is meant to do. And it has caused us to oftentimes say we're talking inside of our company about long-term outcomes, but really when you look at the behaviors, what you're finding is the behaviors are very much focused on what I'm going to get out of this decision in the next 2 to 3 years versus 5, 6, or 10 years. That is not something that works well for bio firms who are building long-term healthcare products, or for environments. Even if you are looking at retail, we've seen that really backfire on organizations like Joanne Stores, who went through their recent bankruptcy and decline. Those kind of long-term conversations just don't happen as often as they need to in decision making. So I think that's the real connection to this, Cliff, that I think we need to think more about, right?
I love that. That's exactly it. And I think that's a good way to wrap up, unless I get any more breaking news in the last 2 seconds, I think. Anyone else? No? Okay.
No. We don't give out of time when we record this, but anytime you send us something, we might be able to get it on the show. So make sure you get it sent to us. 2 quick things. We do have to talk about where we're going to be at. I do think it's important to let everybody know kind of the events, but as I think you've noted before, is that if you go to our website, News and Views, you will get to see all of this information. Some of it we're just adding, but it'll be up there eventually. But you and I will be kind of crisscrossing the market starting September 3rd is kind of our list event. I'll be in New York on September 3rd for ADP's Innovation Day. And then we will both be with the entire Sapient team at HR Tech September 15th through 18th. As we said, be sure to stay through Thursday morning at 8 a.m. That is our session. And then Cliff and I will be talking afterwards at our Ask the Expert. So just know that if you come to that session 8 to 9, and then I think it's like 9:15 or 9:30 to 10:30 is an Ask the Expert session. Right after that in the expo hall, we'll be rushing from our session to that because we know there's always questions. We will get as much as we can in the 45 minutes that they have given us to cover. We are also doing at HR Tech an event on Wednesday. That is a session that we'll be doing in partnership with Harbinger, and that will be focused on the HR buyer, and it will be a little more tailored towards the vendors and product and marketing people who are going to be at the event. Just kind of letting them know, and buyers, I think practitioners, this is important for you, like what's changing that they should be aware so they can do a better job serving you and that space. And so that's going to be exciting. And then both Terry Zipper and I will be delivering sessions at the Women in HR Tech on Tuesday, which will I'll be doing a session with J&J, and then Terry will be closing the Women in HR Tech session. Her closing panel will be on AI and women in HR Tech. And we've got some great panelists there for you. What a good friend of mine, Ekta, as well as I think we have Julie Devlin from UKG. And I know there's one other that I'm not remembering right now. I want to say maybe Jennifer, but I'm not sure. So we'll have more people there. And then you and I will also be at Cliff, we're not sure yet, but we're talking about the SAP event, October 6th and 8th. I will definitely be at Dayforce's Discover event, October 7th and 8th in Las Vegas. And then you're going to be at Oracle, correct, the following week?
That's right. I'll be at Oracle Cloud World. I was there last year. Looking forward to following up on, as I said, a lot of the stories have been coming out in these episodes. And then UKG Aspire, basically the next month after that, right? Or really just a couple of weeks after that. November 3rd and 6th, also in Vegas.
And then I'll be heading out to both Philadelphia and Scottsdale for Sub's last two sort of regional keynotes that I'll be doing on elevating the HR function. Really excited to get those because we'll have a little bit of new data in those that we didn't have in the last keynotes because we've got updated data in the research. So those are going to be in November. And then we are doing a really exciting thing. Both Cliff and I might be there, or we might be splitting our time. We're going to see November 13th and 14th, we're going to do at the Finance Technology Expo for the CFO Council in New York City. We'll be doing a series of roundtables on HR and finance and how they're working together. And that's going to be a really great opportunity for HR and finance to come together at this expo to talk about HR technologies and HR systems and how they work with the finance audience as well, and how those two worlds need to talk more together. I think we have now 3 of the roundtable sponsorships sold. So if you are interested, please be sure to make sure you get that over to us immediately. And then we will also be there at that session having conversations with a lot of organizations in the finance space. Cliff, we are talking about the Unit 4 Analyst Summit. That's also in Atlanta, November 12th and 14th. And I think that's it, but that almost runs us right in. I'll also be doing the Workday event the week after that in Europe, Workday EMEA. So I'll be at that as well. And that will wrap up our travel season for September, October, and November. But I'm sure we'll find something else to add.
I'm sure.
Perhaps it's, but so it's been a lot, Cliff, that we've covered. Is there anything else that we should be checking in on? Anything from the survey? You've been doing some data cleaning and analyzing. Anything you want to share with the audience that they should be aware of as we're getting the data out there?
You know, one thing that's pretty interesting and that we have been tracking, we've been talking about AI a lot, right? We have said, okay, AI maybe wasn't as taken up by organizations as quickly as you might think if you just saw the media landscape. And we said, but it's growing so fast. And we even said, do you expect this to grow again next year? And remember earlier I said, you know, it's always interesting to see when those sort of growth predictions or, you know, sort of responses come through. And I remember we looked at it, are you using AI at your organization? And let's just say that if you do the math from last year, you're going to find that you're going to be able to predict this year.
It is. It was. I was pretty sort of blown away. I mean, it's a little bit later because it includes both 12 and 24 months. So I think people are a little bit ahead. We're a little bit more. They're a little ahead of themselves, but not by much. And I'm excited to see that the world isn't as crazy as we think it is, Cliff. Like that's what I don't know what my keynote will be about, but I think that's going to be one of the conversations we'll be having. Yeah. Is that there's a lot of interesting stuff, but there is room for conversation and there's time for conversation, which is what we need most. So it's
I think that's it. I told that to a sales group and I said, you know, when you're going out there, you know, people are nervous because they hear that the world is changing, and it is by about 5 to 10% per year. And that still can be a lot, but it's you can keep up with it. One of the reasons we do this is just to keep you updated, so it doesn't all seem to come at once, and it feels like, well, everything's different now. Just the highlights of what's happening, because we're in a time of great change. But just if you remember, those of us that are old enough, remember the internet. It wasn't that overnight, all of a sudden, everyone's using Google Maps instead of paper maps. It took some time. There were late takers. There's some gaps in how good it could be used, and that's where we're at right now. So don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like you don't understand the world anymore. It's changing, but it's just not as fun of a headline. No one's going to say the world changed by 3% last year.
The world changes slowly, right? Yeah.
I'm brave enough.
All right. Well, we'll have more interesting updates like that for you. I think one of the fun things that I really am excited to talk about is the bring your own AI conversation. We'll be having more of that probably too. So stay tuned for all the updates that we'll be bringing you over the next couple of months. There will be some good stuff in the September event. It's going to be hard to wait. Isn't that the crazy part, Cliff? Like, it's never fast enough for get the paper done, but it's really hard to kind of wait for the data. We are on tenterhooks trying to save it for you guys. All right. Next couple thing is, as we wrap today, a couple big pushes as well. We are getting ready to start. So be on the lookout for a buy one, get one deal. So if you're interested in making sure you're going to get the next year's report as soon as it is published, we will have that opportunity to buy last year's report and get next year's report automatically. So if you're kind of looking at things year over year, that is coming out probably in the next 2 weeks, maybe a week after this is published. Also, just to kind of, if you're interested in making sure you're signed up for all the information about all this when it's coming out, make sure you sign up at our website for our newsletter to get ongoing updates and research launches, and we'll be speaking and visiting and all the fun stuff that we just talked about today. And finally, be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. These HR Huddle episodes are important to us. If you like them, please be sure to support the podcast by subscribing, leaving ratings and reviews. Ratings are really important. We got a really high rating in sort of this last top 10 thing, but it wasn't a big number of ratings. And again, because I'm a data person, I want to see a total number. So please add ratings if you would like to hear your thoughts on it. Stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content. You can follow us at Sapiens on LinkedIn and Instagram. And finally, I just want to send a thank you to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by their amazing founder, Kelly. Our marketing team, Summer Orlano, Cole Harris, and Linda Galloway, who helps us pull all this together and get it published and make sure you have access to it. Thanks you to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. And thank you to Cliff, who not only pulls all this together, then the week after it goes out, he puts all the links and tags everyone and puts it all on LinkedIn. It's a big process, but we think it's really important for you guys to hear all the upcoming information, make sure you know where it's at. So he does all that work. So thanks, Cliff, as usual. And that's it this week, guys, for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights. And hopefully I will have a tan because I'll be coming back from Hawaii visiting my granddaughter. And some good pictures for everyone. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.